The morning sun reflected off the tall glass windows of Regional Trust Bank as Sarah Chen Williams parked her Tesla Model S in the visitor's spot. She smiled at the irony. Here she was, parking in a space meant for guests at a bank she now owned. The autumn breeze gently ruffled her navy blazer as she stepped out of the car, her leather briefcase containing the $2.3 million check secure in her hand. At 42, Sarah had worked hard to get where she was. The daughter of a Chinese father and African-American mother, she had grown up watching both her parents break barriers in their respective fields. Her father built a successful restaurant chain from a single food truck, while her mother became one of the first black female surgeons at Atlanta General Hospital. Their determination had shaped Sarah's own drive to succeed. The security guard at the entrance nodded politely as she walked in, just another customer on a busy Tuesday morning. Sarah took a moment to observe the bank's operations from near the entrance. The marble floors gleamed under the bright lights, and the pleasant hum of business filled the air. Tellers worked efficiently at their stations, and loan officers led clients to their offices for private discussions. This branch, located in downtown Atlanta, was part of a recent acquisition Sarah had overseen. Regional Trust Bank had been struggling when she first noticed its potential. Through careful negotiation and strategic planning, she had acquired majority ownership just 3 months ago. Today was her first unannounced visit to this location. Sarah purposely dressed in business casual attire, black slacks, a cream silk blouse, and her favorite navy blazer. She wanted to experience how regular customers were treated, not how they would treat the bank's owner. The certified check in her briefcase, proceeds from selling one of her investment properties, provided the perfect reason for a visit. As she joined the line for the tellers, Sarah noticed several things. The line for deposits moved smoothly, but there was some inefficiency in how the drive-through window was being handled. She made mental notes, already thinking of ways to improve the system. A young mother struggled with a stroller in front of her, and Sarah automatically stepped forward to hold the rope barrier aside, earning a grateful smile. The phones rang steadily at the customer service desk, and Sarah listened to how the representatives handled calls. Their tone was professional, but some seemed rushed. Another note for future training programs. Through the glass walls of the offices, she could see loan officers in meetings, their desks covered with paperwork that could probably be digitized. When it was almost her turn, Sarah reached into her briefcase and took out the check. The amount still impressed her, even though she regularly dealt with much larger sums in her corporate role. This money represented something personal, the successful flip of her first major real estate investment, a project she had started before her banking career took off. Jessica, the young teller whose nameplate showed she was new to the job, smiled warmly as Sarah approached. "Good morning, welcome to Regional Trust Bank. How can I help you today?" Sarah returned the smile, appreciating the genuine welcome. "Good morning. I'd like to deposit this check, please." She slid the certified check across the counter. Jessica's eyes widened slightly at the amount. $2.3 million wasn't something she saw every day. She maintained her professional composure, but glanced uncertainly toward her supervisor's desk. This was exactly the kind of situation Sarah wanted to observe. How did staff handle transactions outside their comfort zone? The supervisor's desk, however, was empty. Instead, a man in a crisp gray suit was walking purposefully toward them. David Peterson, according to his name tag, was the branch manager. His expression shifted subtly as he approached, his eyes moving from the check to Sarah's face, then back to the check. Sarah knew that look. She had seen it countless times throughout her career, that moment of doubt, of unconscious bias kicking in. As Peterson reached the counter, she could almost predict what would happen next. But she kept her expression neutral, her posture relaxed. This was, after all, why she had chosen to visit unannounced. "Is there a problem?" she asked quietly, watching Peterson's face as he struggled to maintain his professional mask. The next few minutes would reveal exactly what kind of training this branch needed, and Sarah was ready to learn everything she could from this interaction. David Peterson straightened his gray tie as he approached the counter, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He had been watching the interaction from his office, and something about this situation didn't sit right with him. A check for $2.3 million. From this woman in casual business wear. He had worked in banking for 15 years, and he knew better than to take things at face value. "Is there something I can help with?" he asked, deliberately addressing Jessica rather than Sarah. His voice carried the forced politeness that barely masked his skepticism. Jessica, the young teller, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. This customer would like to deposit a large check, Jessica explained, her voice smaller than before. She glanced apologetically at Sarah, who stood calmly observing the situation. Peterson picked up the check, holding it as if it might bite him. "Ma'am, we have certain protocols for unusual transactions of this size." He emphasized the word unusual while scanning the check for what felt like the 100th time. "We'll need to verify this with the issuing bank, and you'll need to provide several forms of identification." Sarah noticed how he had yet to make direct eye contact with her. Behind her, a white man in an expensive suit deposited a check for $50,000 at another window. That transaction proceeded smoothly, without any special scrutiny. "Of course," Sarah replied evenly, reaching into her briefcase. "I have my driver's license, passport, and business ID here." She placed them on the counter one by one, each document more than sufficient for a normal banking transaction. Peterson barely glanced at the IDs. "We'll also need proof of where these funds came from. Do you have the original sale documentation, tax records, business licenses?" His questions came rapid fire, each one more demanding than the last. A small crowd of customers had begun to form behind Sarah, their curious whispers filling the air. Some looked uncomfortable, others impatient, and a few seemed to understand exactly what was happening. "Mr. Peterson," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm, "I understand the need for security protocols. However, this is a certified check, already verified by the issuing bank. Could you please show me the written policy requiring additional documentation for certified checks?" Peterson's face reddened slightly. "Ma'am, I don't need to show you our internal policies. I'm the branch manager, and I'm telling you what we require." Sarah noticed Jessica, the teller, typing something into her computer. The young woman's eyes widened as she read something on her screen, but Peterson was too focused on his interrogation to notice. "Actually," Sarah continued, pulling out her phone, "according to the Federal Reserve Bank's Regulation CC, certified checks are considered guaranteed funds. They must be processed within 1 business day." She held up her phone, showing the regulation on the screen. "Would you like to read it?" Peterson's composure cracked slightly. He wasn't used to customers who knew banking regulations better than he did. "Ma'am, I'm trying to protect our bank from potential fraud. Surely you understand that when someone comes in with a check this large." "Someone like what, Mr. Peterson?" Sarah asked quietly. The lobby had grown eerily silent. Even the security guard had moved closer, sensing the tension in the air. Before Peterson could respond, a woman in her 50s rushed out from the back offices. Linda Martinez, the senior loan officer, had transferred from another branch 3 months ago. Her face showed a mix of horror and recognition as she approached. "Mrs. Chen Williams," Linda exclaimed, hurrying toward them. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were visiting today." She turned to Peterson, whose face had begun to lose its color. "David, this is Sarah Chen Williams. She's the new majority owner of Regional Trust Bank." The silence in the lobby grew deeper. Peterson's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The check in his hand trembled slightly as the reality of the situation crashed over him. Sarah watched as the implications of his behavior dawned on him, his face cycling through shock, embarrassment, and fear. But instead of the anger he clearly expected, she simply reached for her business card and placed it on the counter. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice level and professional, "I think we need to have a conversation about customer service standards at this branch. Would you please join me in your office?" She emphasized the word "your," knowing it might not be his office for much longer. The walk to Peterson's office felt like the longest 30 seconds of his life. Sarah observed how the other employees watched them, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. Linda Martinez, the senior loan officer who had recognized her, quickly began directing other staff to handle the growing line of customers. Inside the office, Sarah took out her phone and pressed record. "I hope you don't mind if I document this conversation," she said, placing the phone on Peterson's desk. He stared at it like it was a ticking bomb. "Mrs. Chen Williams, I can explain," Peterson started, his voice shaking slightly. The confidence he had shown earlier had evaporated, replaced by nervous energy that made him repeatedly adjust his tie. Please do, Sarah replied, taking the visitor's chair. She noted how he hadn't offered her his seat, despite now knowing she owned the bank. These small details told her everything she needed to know about ingrained behaviors. Through the glass walls, they could see the bank lobby returning to normal. A young black woman approached Jessica's window with a check. Sarah watched as Peterson's eyes darted toward the transaction, his ingrained instinct to scrutinize clearly visible. Mr. Peterson, Sarah said, drawing his attention back. Before you explain, I'd like you to watch something. She pulled out her tablet and opened a security app. The bank's cameras had captured everything: his approach to the counter, his dismissive behavior, the different treatment of other customers. As they reviewed the footage together, Sarah pointed out specific moments. Notice here, when Mr. Thompson deposited his $50,000 check. No extra verification requested. And here, Mrs. Anderson with her $75,000 withdrawal. Processed immediately. She paused the video. Would you like to explain the difference in treatment? Peterson's forehead had begun to sweat. We've had issues with fraud recently, he mumbled, reaching for a tissue. I was just being careful. Interesting, Sarah replied, opening a folder on her tablet. I have the fraud reports from all our branches right here. This location has had exactly 2 fraudulent checks in the past year. Both were for less than $5,000, and both were presented by white men in business suits. The room fell silent except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Outside, Linda was training Jessica on a new procedure, their heads bent together over the computer screen. The young teller had handled the situation with remarkable professionalism. Sarah pulled out a small notebook and began writing. Today's incident has shown me several things we need to address. First, our staff needs better training on regulatory requirements for certified checks. Second, we need clear, written procedures that are applied equally to all customers. Peterson watched her write, his face growing paler with each note. Are you going to fire me? He finally asked. Sarah looked up from her notebook. She saw fear in his eyes, but also something else, a glimmer of understanding about what he had done wrong. Instead of answering immediately, she asked, What do you think should happen, Mr. Peterson? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked down at his hands, then out at the lobby where business continued as usual. A diverse group of customers went about their banking, served by an equally diverse staff. Only now did he seem to notice this. He started, then stopped. I've never thought of myself as prejudiced. But watching that video, his voice trailed off. Sarah checked her watch. It was 10:30 a.m. In just 30 minutes, this branch visit had transformed from a simple check deposit into a watershed moment for institutional change. Mr. Peterson, I'm not going to fire you today, she said finally. His relief was visible but short-lived as she continued. Instead, I want you to help me document every single instance of bias you've observed or participated in at this bank. We're going to use this as a case study for all our branches. She opened her tablet to a blank document and began typing. Case study, Unconscious Bias in Banking, a personal account by David Peterson. Looking up at him, she asked, Are you ready to be honest about what happened here today? Peterson straightened in his chair, loosened his tie slightly, and nodded. The real work was about to begin. Sarah opened her phone and dialed a number while Peterson watched nervously. Marcus? Yes, I need you to clear your schedule for the next 2 hours. Bring HR down to the downtown branch. Yes, it's important. She ended the call and turned to Peterson. Marcus Chen is our regional director. He should be here in 20 minutes. Peterson's face, which had regained some color, went pale again. The regional director. I thought you said you weren't going to fire me. I'm not, Sarah replied, pulling out the check that had started everything. But what happened today isn't just about you, Mr. Peterson. It's about a system that needs fixing. Now, while we wait, let's process my deposit correctly. They walked back to the lobby together. Sarah could feel the eyes of every employee following them. Jessica, the young teller, straightened up as they approached her window. Jessica, Sarah said warmly, would you please show Mr. Peterson the correct procedure for handling a certified check deposit? The young woman's eyes widened at being asked to train her own manager, but she nodded confidently. Yes, Mrs. Chen Williams. Jessica pulled up the bank's procedure manual on her screen. According to our guidelines, a certified check is verified funds, requiring only standard ID verification. The funds should be available by next business day, as per Regulation CC. Peterson watched and listened, his embarrassment visible as Jessica efficiently processed the deposit that he had made such a fuss about. Several customers in line nodded approvingly at the scene unfolding before them. Just then, Marcus Chen strode through the bank's front doors. At 60, with salt and pepper hair and a commanding presence, he had worked his way up from teller to regional director over 30 years. Behind him came Maria Rodriguez, the head of HR, carrying a laptop and looking concerned. Sarah led them all to the branch's conference room. The glass walls allowed the staff to see but not hear what was happening. She wanted this transparency. It would be part of the learning experience for everyone. "Before we begin," Sarah said, setting up her tablet to display on the room's screen, "I want to make something clear. This meeting isn't about punishment. It's about transformation." She played the security footage of the earlier incident. Marcus watched with a deepening frown. Maria took rapid notes on her laptop. Peterson seemed to sink lower in his chair with each passing moment of the video. When it finished, Sarah spoke. "Mr. Peterson, would you like to share your thoughts about what we just watched?" Peterson straightened up slightly. For the first time that day, he looked directly at Sarah. I was wrong. Watching it like this, I can see my bias clearly. The way I spoke to you, the extra requirements I invented, how I treated other customers differently." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've probably been doing this for years without realizing it." Maria stopped typing and looked up. "This is exactly why our traditional sensitivity training isn't enough," she said. "We need real examples, real consequences." "Agreed," Marcus added. "But Sarah, why aren't we terminating his employment? This seems like clear discrimination." Sarah stood and walked to the whiteboard. She picked up a marker and wrote, "Transform, not terminate." "If we fire Mr. Peterson, we lose an opportunity," she explained. "Instead, I want him to help us create a new training program, one based on real experiences, real mistakes, and real change." She turned to Peterson. "Are you willing to be the face of that change?" Peterson looked around the room, at Marcus's stern expression, Maria's thoughtful gaze, and finally at Sarah's challenging look. Through the glass walls, he could see his employees working, some stealing glances at the conference room. "Yes," he said finally, his voice stronger than before. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Sarah nodded and wrote on the whiteboard. "Step 1. Acknowledge the problem." She handed the marker to Peterson. "Your turn. What's step 2? Peterson stared at the whiteboard, marker in hand, aware that everyone in the conference room was watching him. The words, "Step 1. Acknowledge the problem," seemed to glow on the white surface. After a moment's hesitation, he wrote, "Step 2. Listen to those affected." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Good. Let's start right now." She pressed a button on the conference room phone. "Linda, could you please ask Jessica to join us? And then cover her window." A few minutes later, Jessica entered the conference room, looking nervous but determined. Sarah gestured for her to sit down. "Jessica, could you share with us how you felt during the incident this morning?" Jessica straightened in her chair, glancing briefly at Peterson before speaking. "I knew something was wrong," she said, her voice gaining strength as she continued. "I've been here 3 months, and I've noticed patterns. Some customers get extra scrutiny, others don't. When Mrs. Chen Williams came in, I actually had the regulations ready on my screen because I expected Mr. Peterson to intervene." The room fell silent. Maria typed furiously on her laptop while Marcus shook his head slowly. Peterson looked as if someone had punched him in the stomach. "You expected it?" Sarah asked gently. "Has this happened before?" Jessica nodded. "Last week, a black business owner tried to deposit a $50,000 check. Mr. Peterson required 3 forms of ID and called the issuing bank. The same day, a white customer deposited $75,000 with just a driver's license." Sarah turned to Peterson. "Did you realize you were doing this?" Peterson wiped his forehead with a tissue. "No. I told myself I was just being thorough, following procedures. But hearing it like this," he turned to Jessica, "why didn't you say something? Would you have listened?" Jessica asked quietly. I need this job. Marcus interrupted, his voice firm but fair. This is exactly why we need systematic change. One person's bias becomes institutional practice if we don't address it. Sarah walked to the whiteboard again. Under Peterson's line, she wrote, Step 3. Document everything. She turned to Maria. I want every transaction over $10,000 from the past 6 months reviewed. Look for patterns in how we treated different customers. Maria nodded, already creating a spreadsheet. I'll have my team start immediately. We should also review customer complaints and feedback forms. Good, Sarah said. She wrote. Step 4. Create new protocols. Looking at Peterson, she asked, What would have prevented this morning's incident? Peterson stood up slowly and approached the whiteboard. Clear, written procedures that apply to everyone equally. No manager override without documented reason. Regular audit of large transactions to check for bias. He wrote each point carefully, his hand steadier now. Excellent, Sarah said. Now, here's what's going to happen next. She turned to address everyone in the room. Mr. Peterson will take 2 weeks of paid leave. During this time, he'll work with HR to document every instance he can remember where bias influenced his decisions. She continued writing on the board. Step 5. Training reform. When he returns, Sarah had explained, he'll help develop and lead our new bias training program. His first-hand experience and willingness to change will make this training real and relatable. Jessica raised her hand tentatively. Could regular employees contribute to the training too? We see things at the front line that management might miss. Absolutely, Sarah agreed, adding. Step 6. Include all voices. Marcus checked his watch. The morning's almost over. We should get a memo out to all branches before lunch. People will be talking about this. Sarah nodded. Mr. Peterson, would you like to draft that memo? Complete transparency about what happened and what we're doing to fix it. Peterson looked surprised but determined. Yes, I would. It should come from me. He paused, then added, and I owe everyone an apology, starting with you, Mrs. Chen Williams. The best apology is changed behavior, Sarah replied. Now, let's get to work. We have a bank to transform. 2 weeks passed quickly. Peterson spent his leave time in deep reflection, writing detailed reports of past incidents and working with HR through video calls. Each evening, he sat at his home office, reviewing years of decisions that now looked very different through his new lens of awareness. On a rainy Monday morning, Peterson returned to the bank. The lobby looked the same, but something had changed. New posters about equal banking services decorated the walls, and each desk displayed a small card with the bank's updated service protocols. Sarah was already there when he arrived, sitting in the conference room with Marcus and Maria. A stack of training materials sat on the table, and a projector displayed new customer service guidelines on the wall. Good morning, Mr. Peterson, Sarah greeted him. Are you ready for today? Peterson nodded, setting his briefcase down. Inside were dozens of pages of notes he'd written during his leave. I've identified 47 specific instances where my bias affected customer service in the past year alone, he said quietly. It's not easy to face, but it's necessary. Maria opened her laptop. We've cross-referenced your reports with our transaction data. The patterns are clear. She turned the screen to show charts and graphs displaying disparities in how different customers were treated. Today's training session starts in an hour, Marcus added. All branch managers from the region will be here. Are you prepared to share your story? Peterson took a deep breath. Yes, I practiced my presentation all weekend. He pulled out a USB drive. I've also created a video compilation of security footage showing different examples of bias treatment. Seeing it on camera, it's impossible to deny. Sarah stood and walked to the window, watching as employees began arriving for the day. Jessica's promotion to head teller goes into effect today, she said. Her suggestion about frontline staff input has already improved our procedures. The conference room began filling with branch managers from other locations. Some gave Peterson uncertain looks, having read his memo about the incident. Others seemed curious about what would unfold. At exactly 9 a.m., Sarah called the meeting to order. Thank you all for being here. Today isn't about shame or blame. It's about recognition and change. She gestured to Peterson. David, The floor is yours. Peterson walked to the front of the room, his hands slightly shaking as he connected his laptop to the projector. On the screen appeared a simple title, What I Learned About Bias, A Personal Journey. 2 weeks ago, he began, I thought I was protecting our bank. Instead, I was perpetuating a system of discrimination that I didn't even realize existed. His voice grew stronger as he continued. Let me show you what that looked like. The room watched in silence as Peterson played video clips of various transactions, pointing out subtle and obvious differences in how he treated customers. He showed the incident with Sarah, explaining each mistake he made. But identifying the problem isn't enough, he said, changing slides. We need concrete solutions. He outlined the new protocols, standardized ID requirements, documented reasons for any additional verification, regular audits of transaction patterns, and an anonymous reporting system for employees who witness bias. Sarah watched from the back of the room as Peterson handled questions from other managers. Some were defensive at first, but his honest answers and clear evidence began breaking down their resistance. What if we're not sure about a transaction? One manager asked. That's why we have clear, written procedures now, Peterson replied. If you follow them consistently for everyone, you remove the influence of unconscious bias. As the training continued, Sarah noticed something remarkable. Peterson wasn't just reciting facts or showing remorse. He was leading a transformation. His personal experience made the training real and immediate in a way that typical corporate sessions never could. By lunchtime, other managers were sharing their own experiences and asking for guidance on reviewing their practices. What had started as one branch's crisis was becoming a bank-wide movement for change. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from her board of directors, training video going viral internally. Other banks requesting access to program, potential industry-wide impact. She smiled, watching Peterson draw a diagram explaining how bias affects banking decisions. Sometimes the best teachers were former offenders who had truly learned their lesson. 3 months after the incident, Sarah stood at a podium in the National Banking Conference in Chicago. The large conference hall was packed with banking executives, regulators, and industry leaders. On the screen behind her, a simple question displayed. How do we build a fair banking system? In the front row, Peterson sat with Jessica and Linda Martinez. They had all been invited to share their experiences as part of the presentation. The incident at their branch had become a case study in banking reform, and other banks were eager to learn from their transformation. Change doesn't happen in boardrooms, Sarah began, her voice carrying through the hall. It happens at the front desk, at the teller window, in those small moments when decisions are made. She clicked to the next slide, showing their branches before and after statistics. In just 3 months, our customer satisfaction scores have increased by 45%. Minority-owned business accounts have doubled. Processing times for large transactions are now consistent across all demographic groups. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. And it all started with one wrong decision that we turned into a right one. Peterson stood up when Sarah called him to the stage. The audience stirred. Many had read about him in banking journals, but few expected him to speak openly about his actions. My name is David Peterson, he began, and 3 months ago, I was part of the problem. His voice was steady now, confident in a way it hadn't been before. Today, I'm here to show you how we became part of the solution. He shared their new training programs, the transaction monitoring system, and the employee feedback protocols. Jessica joined him on stage to explain how frontline staff now felt empowered to question potentially biased decisions. Last week, Jessica told the audience, a customer tried to deposit a $500,000 check. Under our old system, they might have faced extra scrutiny based on how they looked. Instead, we followed our standard procedures, the same ones we use for everyone. The transaction was completed in 8 minutes. Linda Martinez took the stage next, showing how their loan approval rates have become more equitable. We're not just saying we offer equal service, she explained. We're proving it with data, transparency, and consistent procedures. In the audience, bank executives took notes. Federal regulators nodded approvingly. This wasn't just corporate talk about diversity. This was practical, implementable change. Sarah returned to the podium. We're not done yet. Today, I'm announcing the launch of the Banking Equality Initiative. She clicked to reveal the details of a new industry-wide program. We're making our training materials, protocols, and monitoring systems available to any bank that commits to implementing them. The announcement caused a stir in the audience. Several major banks had already signed up for the program, and others were showing interest. What had started as one branch's crisis was becoming a movement for industry-wide change. After the presentation, Peterson found himself surrounded by other bank managers, all asking questions about implementation. The key, he told them, is to be honest about where you're starting from. You can't fix what you won't acknowledge. Jessica was interviewed by Banking Monthly magazine, explaining how employee empowerment had changed their branch culture. We're not just following rules, she said. We're building relationships with all our customers, treating everyone with the respect they deserve. Back at their hotel that evening, Sarah held a small celebration for her team. I want you all to understand what you've accomplished, she told them, raising a glass of sparkling water. You've turned a moment of bias into a movement for change. Peterson looked around at his colleagues, people who had become more than just co-workers through this journey. When you first caught me in my bias, he said to Sarah, I thought it was the end of my career. Instead, it was the beginning of something much more important. Sarah smiled. That's because you chose to learn and grow instead of defend and deny. Real change happens when people are brave enough to admit their mistakes and work to fix them. As they celebrated, Sarah's phone kept buzzing with messages from other bank CEOs wanting to join the initiative. Tomorrow, they would begin the work of expanding their program nationally. But tonight, they celebrated how far they'd come from that morning when a bank manager had doubted a check from the wrong customer. 1 year had passed since the day Sarah Chen Williams walked into her own bank branch with a $2.3 million check. The downtown Atlanta branch looked different now. The walls displayed customer success stories from all communities, and a large plaque near the entrance read, Banking for everyone. Every customer, every time. David Peterson stood in his office, yes, still his office, looking out at the busy lobby. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting the diverse group of customers and staff going about their daily business. On his desk sat a framed copy of Banking Industry Weekly with the headline, Regional Trust Bank sets new standards in banking equality. Jessica, now the branch's operations manager, knocked on his door. The high school students are here for the financial literacy program, she announced. Peterson smiled and grabbed his presentation folder. This was his favorite part of the new initiatives they'd launched. In the conference room, 20 teenagers from local schools sat waiting. Many came from communities that had historically been underserved by banks. Peterson no longer saw potential problems when he looked at diverse faces. He saw future customers, entrepreneurs, and community leaders. Welcome to Regional Trust Bank, he began. A year ago, I learned the most important lesson of my banking career. Today, I'm going to share that lesson with you, along with everything you need to know about building your financial future. As Peterson taught the students about banking basics, Sarah quietly entered the room. She had come to check on the program's progress, but found herself drawn into watching the transformation she had helped create. The man teaching these students was barely recognizable as the same manager who had doubted her check a year ago. After the session, Sarah called a branch meeting. Everyone gathered in the lobby before opening hours: tellers, loan officers, security staff, and management. The faces around her represented every community they served. 1 year ago, Sarah began, this branch became the catalyst for change in the banking industry. Today, I want to share some numbers with you. She held up a tablet displaying their annual report. Our Banking Equality Initiative has been adopted by 127 banks across the country. Customer complaints about discrimination have dropped by 89% at participating branches. Small business loan approvals are up 60% across all demographic groups. She paused, looking around the room, but numbers don't tell the whole story. Linda Martinez, still their senior loan officer, raised her hand. Last week, I helped a Black entrepreneur secure funding for her tech startup. Under the old system, she might have been discouraged before even applying. Instead, she's now creating jobs in our community. Peterson added, and our financial literacy program has reached over 2,000 students this year. We're not just changing banking, we're changing lives. Sarah nodded, then revealed their newest initiative, The Federal Reserve has asked us to help develop national guidelines for fair banking practices. They're using our protocols as a model for industry-wide standards. The team broke into applause, but Sarah wasn't finished. Mr. Peterson, would you like to share your news? Peterson stepped forward, looking both proud and humble. I've been asked to lead the national training program for bank managers. We'll be teaching other branches how to identify and eliminate bias in banking services. Jessica spoke up from her place near the front. And I'll be taking over as branch manager when Mr. Peterson moves to his new role. This announcement brought another round of applause. Jessica would be the youngest branch manager in the bank's history and the first woman of color in that position. As the meeting ended and everyone prepared for the day ahead, Sarah pulled Peterson aside. "Do you ever think about that morning?" she asked. Peterson nodded thoughtfully. "Every day, but not with shame anymore. I think about how one moment of confronting my bias changed everything, not just for me, but for thousands of people we'll never meet." Sarah watched as the first customers of the day entered the lobby. A young black woman approached Jessica's window with a large check in hand. Without hesitation or extra scrutiny, Jessica began processing the transaction with a warm smile. "That's how banking should be," Sarah said softly. "That's how it will be." Peterson straightened his tie, a new habit born of confidence rather than nervousness. One transaction at a time, one person at a time, we're making it happen. Outside, the morning sun illuminated the bank's new motto, etched in gold letters: "Your money, your dreams, your bank, equally serving all."